Thank you, Eric.
Thanks, David. Now, just for me to understand who's in the room, how many of you are from the corporate sector? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. How many of you are from the non-for-profit sector? A majority. And government? Okay, great. And how many of you attended our debate yesterday? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you very much for coming this morning. What I'd like to do today is to talk to you about the increasing complexity and what we call this new landscape between non-for-profit and for-profit. And I guess the appropriate part to start is to look at the evolution and the conversion between those two sectors, to look at the way CSR is driving the corporate partnership platform. And I want to talk to you about spiritual capital and look at the bigger picture. So if we go back in time, it's pretty obvious that, today the dominant players on the global sphere are the corporation. It hasn't been the case always, but it certainly is what's happening today. And if you look at some of the statistics which you've heard many times, I'm sure, but the first one only tell you that 51 of the largest economies in the world are corporations. So we are now facing with corporations that are the size of countries, or if not bigger. Okay? So no wonder that the government and the community are asking increasingly for corporates to be socially responsible. And in fact, corporates themselves are realizing, and it's been the topic of the last 2 days, that it is good business to actually be acting as a good CSR agent. If we look at the role of government, because it's quite important to understand globally and in Australia what is the evolving role of government. And what we're observing is that less and less government are getting involved in the delivery of services. They are shifting from service delivery to outsources of program. And that's mean that more and more new players, corporate players and non-for-profit, are winning tenders and delivering programs that used to be run by government. And we're not talking small bickies. If you look at some of the statistics on the slide, that's happening in Australia, that's happening in the UK, and that's increasingly happening in the US. Okay? And of course, the role of government is continuing to look at funding new seed program and also looking at initiative and tax incentive to support the non-for-profit sector. Well, what does it mean for the non-for-profit sector? Is more and more we are, for those who want to have a say and a role to play in that outsourcing game, we are being called to run large, complex operations. And I'll give you just one example. In Australia, the Job Network program, when it was outsourced, was a $1.6 billion contract. And I think it was one of the most significant outsourced contracts from government after the armament contract. So, which meant for Mission Australia that we decided to go and tender for it. We got a contract worth about $80 million a year, and we expanded our operation all across Australia. And that's an easy thing to do, because in 10 years' time we've moved from an organisation that was running an expenditure budget of about 45 million to an expenditure budget of 200 million this year. So you can imagine the complexity of growing and developing your business at that pace, which also means that we have to become much more professional, accountable, and be as efficient in the corporate sector, because our key competitors in that field are the corporates. So you can start to get a sense that the landscape is shifting from what was used to be traditional charity landscape, corporate landscape, to something more significant. And that slide gives you an idea of what I mean by that. Traditionally the corporate sector have been concentrating on making profits, and still are, but they are starting to look at how do they implement their corporate social responsibility platform. So they're either developing large foundations or partnering with non-for-profit to do that. And on the other side, the non-for-profit sector are looking more and more for new income stream to develop their financial sustainability platform. So they're also looking at developing businesses that generate profits, and they can channel the profit into the community. And what's in the middle is a CSR, which is becoming basically, from my perspective, the opportunity for corporate and non-for-profit to be partnering on a larger scale. And at the same time, probably some of you understand that corporations are also using lots of clever marketing tools as well as dollars and to develop brands that we call enriching brands, which have a very strong community focus. So we are not any longer in the 60s or the 70s where those three sectors had clear demarcation line. We are operating in an environment globally where it's becoming increasingly difficult to understand what is the limit from the operating environment perspective from those three sectors, and particularly between the corporate and the non-for-profit. Okay, so, and these slides tell you that from the perspective of corporate partnership, we've seen a significant evolution also from what used to be, 10 or 15 years ago, philanthropic involvement, to eventually sponsorship, cause-related marketing, and CSR. And CSR is really, from my perspective, the heart and we could say the soul of corporates. We're not talking about giving $50,000 to 50 charities. We're talking about a large sum of money which is strategically involved to help the corporation to implement their CSR platform. And for us, for the non-for-profit sector, we have to be able to partner with those corporations on multiple grounds, and I'm going to explain that in a minute. So the consciousness, which used to be often, 10 years ago, the chairman of a corporate decided that he wants to support the Sydney Opera Ballet and pass that through the board, to what we call now the CSR consciousness, which is really where the CEO and the senior executive of large corporations spend significant time debating, analysing and measuring, where do they want to involve their dollars and how do they want to do it, and what is the accountability around those issues. So we're seeing a significant shift from philanthropic giving to corporate social responsibility engagement. Okay. This gives you an idea of if you look at the drivers of CSR for the for-profit, and people have talked about that extensively in the last 2 days, you can see that it's about ethical values, innovation, learning, employees' motivation, reputation, cost-saving, economic value, access to capital, and risk management. So what are the areas where the non-for-profit can actually have an impact? And they are in relation to ethical and values in the concept of spiritual capital, and I'll talk about that later on. Certainly in relation to innovation and learning. Employees' motivation, it's one of the biggest opportunity today for the non-for-profit and the for-profit to partner on what we call employee community days, and Westpac, which is here in the room, has been one of the leaders in that field. But also, as we are in the age where, and we've seen that with Nike and other brands that have, over the years spent millions of dollars on brand advertising, and over one or two critical issues have seen their brand value and the capitalization of their brand value going down very quickly because of what was happening in Indonesia. We know that now consumers can go on the net fast and they can access to information that they didn't have the ability to do before, and so corporations have to rely on good stories more and more to manage their brand. And again, I think the NGO has a role to play in that. So I'll give you just a couple of examples of how Mission Australia have been partnering with corporates to help them on their CSR platform. And I'll start with innovation and learning. Mission Australia recently opened our new homeless inner city program. We were looking at a renovation of one of our icons, probably in the 70s, called Campbell House, which was looking at a homeless residential. And we looked at it. We studied and researched the new service delivery model around the world, and we came up with a program that was worth $7 million. So the problem was for us, how do we get $7 million to actually run it? And this is where we looked at corporate partnership as well as individual partners. And the model that we use is not the traditional model where you just go out and ask for donations and that's about the only focus that you look at. We've put together a three-dimensional model where we're obviously looking for cash, but we're also looking for in-kind expertise and networks. And over a period of a year, 12 months roughly, we raised $7 million using a capital campaign consultant to support us, but basically using our networks with our current corporate partners to help them to get on board with this program. If you look at reputation and brand, again, we were involved recently with a partnership with the Sydney Morning Herald, and we launched a publication which some of you may have seen in the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, 2 million publication around Australia. And again, our corporate partners bought advertising in it, which meant that for us it was basically a cost-neutral exercise, but a fantastic opportunity to talk about our stories and about Mission Australia and what we're doing, in particular from our client's perspective. If you look at what we've done with Macquarie Bank in terms of our research and social policy unit, we have a partnership with them, which is a 3-year partnership, where Macquarie Bank has accepted to pay for our operational costs, which is a value of $250,000 a year. But this partnership has grown, and this is one of the messages I wanted to give you this morning, is that, the times where partnerships between non-for-profit and for-profit were very much single focus, which was cash-driven, is gone. I think if you want to successfully manage partnership in the future, you have to really looking at how you can leverage from a cash perspective to in-kind pro bono networking, using maybe your corporate partners to support you with your social advocacy statements, etc., etc., etc. And you can see in that slide it's about 4 or 5 dimension. And when you look at evaluating your partnerships after a period of 2 to 3 years, you can see that the value for the organization is significant. Now, if you only look at the cash value, that's only one dimension. But if you find ways to measure the income and the pro bono area, you can add probably or double or triple the value of the partnerships. And we work with PwC to help us to set up a sophisticated way to do that.
So you mentioned $250,000.
Yeah.
Was that the cash contribution?
That's a cash contribution. You can see in the top. No, actually, it's not here. The cash contribution is $250,000 a year. The staff engagement is worth about $100,000 cash a year. Macquarie Bank helped us with the MS centres, and they provided a couple of their executives to help us with the capital ground, and that was a value of, again, about $50,000 cash. And then there's a range of other streams of activity that we do with them. So the overall value for us of the partnership, not in cash, it's probably about $500,000, but when you add the other component, you go quickly to $750,000 plus. So what we have to do also is to do a lot of work with our brand, and I talked about that yesterday, because if for Mission Australia, what does it mean to be sustainable? And if Mission Australia is engaged in a CSR platform, or what we call a sustainability platform, we have to look at what is our key brand message. Are we talking about problems, or are we talking about solution and long-term outcomes for our clients? So we did a significant amount of work in the last 2 years to refocus our brand to basically tell our hero story, our client's story, and celebrating the outcome from our perspective and from their perspective, which is quite a new thinking for the charity sector, because obviously for many years the fundraisers have been saying, look, if you don't concentrate on telling the problems over and over and over, you won't raise the money, because people are not, the community is not necessarily going to support positive advertising. Well, we've actually gone against that, and we've proved that it's not the case. And what we've seen through our research and through talking to our stakeholders is that, in fact, the community, in particular the corporate sector, is starting to ask increasing questions about, if I'm going to invest in your organization, I want a social outcome in return. I don't want to be told every year that the problem is compelling and there's no solution for it. And same with our donors. They're starting to look, for 20 years you've sending us the same sort of appeals later, the problem don't seem to be getting better. Why would I keep giving you the same amount of dollars every year? So by focusing on telling the good story and focusing on our clients, we've been able to shift the positioning of our brand. And of course, our sustainability platform is very much depending on income stream, and we've looked at corporate and marketing as an exercise. We've done a campaign on Youth Suicide with Harvey Norman and Sony Foundations, which raised $500,000 in about 6 weeks, and they use advertising buying powers. They used, obviously, products of Sony for a period of 6 weeks, which every product around Australia was a percentage of that sales would go to Mission Australia. And again, it was a very powerful way to look at, a bit laterally to look at, is CRM corporate marketing, is it an effective way to help corporations to deliver their CSR platform as well as to produce cash and resources for the non-profit sector. If you look at that slide, you can see that, again, for us, one of the critical things that we've got to do is to look at our supplier relationship. We're a large organisation. We've got 3,000 employees. We've got a budget of 20 million plus. So we obviously have a lot of suppliers. And we've done a lot of work in the last 2 years to either renegotiate our contract to save cost or work with organisations like Westpac and look at their skill set and help and ask them to come to help us with some of our needs. For example, Westpac was one of the provided, their top expert in helping us to relaunch our website. Now, if we had to do that on our own, first of all, we didn't have the skill-based in-house. It would have cost us probably 250k plus. And I'm not sure that we would have achieved the same result. So thanks to organisations like Westpac and others, LGL, for example, who's been sort of helping us with our electricity bill for free for some of our services in winter, we are finding that there's actually ways to save money, again, if you engage with your partners at the right time, and if you build trusting relationships that are evolving over a period of years. So we're not talking 1 year involvement, we're talking minimum 3 years. And the last part is, in terms of our governance issues, we came to a place where we had to actually look at our sustainability report. Because, as I said yesterday, we can't be going to corporation all the time and say, look, what are you guys doing about CSR, without looking ourselves about, what is our renewable energy policy, how we prepare to cost in our fuel consumptions, what is our social way to report on outcomes, etc., etc. So we've decided to get on that journey. Well, I've said yesterday, we've employed Sharon Jackson, which used David Grayson's sort of 7 steps. And at the moment we've done 1, 2, 3, 4, and we're embarking on 5. Now it's been an extraordinary journey for us because it's really basically put sustainability at the heart of our corporate planning. And I think, in the future, if we project ourselves in the future, we'll find that it's been one of the most significant shifts that Mission Australia has done in recent time. The drivers, as we've seen before, are not dissimilar to the corporate sector. The scoping has been an interesting area for us, and we've looked at this CRI Index program to help us. But of course, it needs adaptation for the non-for-profit sector. There's actually no tools globally that are designed for the non-for-profit sector. So we are looking and engaging a range of players to look at, can we actually design tools which will eventually be an index for the non-for-profit sector. And it would be fantastic that, in the next 2 to 3 years, if we could get this outcome. So I'd like to talk to you a little bit about spiritual capital, because that's an area that I'm quite interested and passionate about. There's somebody from Oxford, of actually 2 key players in that field from Oxford that have come up with the concept of spiritual capital in the last 2 years. I'm sure you're familiar with emotional intelligence and the work that Daniel Goleman and Annie McKee have done in the US and all around the world. Well, Dana Zohar came up with a new concept, which is what you call spiritual capital, which is looking at, what is the meaning of so if corporations are engaged in building, their sort of strategies to develop their businesses, is there a meaning behind it? Dana is actually a neuroscientist. She's done a lot of work on the brainwave, and she's and understanding how the brain has actually three components. One, which is a serial oscillation part, which is correspond to the IQ, then the part of the brain that corresponds to the EQ, emotional intelligence, and then she's found with other scientists around the world that there's actually another part, which is called the unitive brain, that looks at finding meaning into all the different parts of your brain and yourself, and bringing those meaningful conversations at the heart of what drives you. Okay, and if you look at the implication for that in terms of medicine, corporation, etc., we're going to see in the future that more and more people are going to look for meaning when they go to work, and certainly our research for Generation Y is showing that this generation does not want only to work for a package. They want to learn, They want to grow their understanding about community issues. They want to, if possible, look at their spiritual journey. And so increasingly they're going to be looking at ways that cooperation can support that. Okay. And, if you talk to some of the large service firms in Sydney, they're already struggling because they're finding that people in their early 20s don't want to work 80 hours a week with a view to become a partner in 6 years' time. They have different values. They have different aspiration. And unless, at the time where you're looking at an aging population and the race for talents, unless you're starting to reflect and engage on some of those, what you could call right brain activities, I think you're going to find that some corporations are struggling, and not-for-profit, are struggling in the future, I'm talking 5 to 10 years, to actually attract and retain those talents. Now, some organizations like the Body Shop, for example, have done that very well. And they've built a culture which is so focusing on spiritual capital that actually the employees that work for them are sort of, social activists in their own field. So there's somebody in Sydney called Gianni Zappala, which some of you may know, which actually work for Westpac at the moment, that has come up with the concept of, looking at SQ as spiritual intelligence. And again, there's a range of books, if you're interested in that area, that are written about spiritual intelligence. But what he's saying is financial and economic capital are linked with IQ, social capital is more linked with EQ, and then sort of spiritual capital is a dimension of SQ. So it is a new wave, and I know that in the US, in Harvard and Yale University, there's a lot of research at the moment in terms of, what sort of CEOs are we going to need for the future to operate globally very complex businesses, and not only complex technically speaking, but culturally speaking. So they are sort of looking at how can we actually measure SQ, and what sort of leadership do we need in the future. And I'll talk a bit about that in terms of the bigger picture issue. Because basically, if you're running a global business, which is operation in Asia, in Europe, in South America, you are going across so many different cultures, so many different religious cultures, that you have to have some people that have the understanding, what I call the SQ understanding and cultural understanding, to actually lead people, inspire them, and unleash their sort of passion and spirit to actually deliver for your organization. McKinsey has done a lot of work in that area. They've developed a leadership program that's based on self-transformation. I don't know if you've heard about Michael Rennie, which used to be running McKinsey in Sydney. Michael had a major life-threatening disease, went out in the wilderness for a couple of years to get better, came back and used his journey and all the things that he'd learned in his life, and developed a training and a leadership program that is now one of the best-selling McKinsey program in the world, and is now working in the US with large foundation and large corporation. And it is based on what they call self-transformation, which is, what is it in you that stops you to be a great leader? Because, we are finding increasingly that it's not, you cannot actually reach a stage of consciousness with just academic training. It has to be about experiential learning. And this is also where I guess the interest in spirituality is also increasing in Australia and all over the world. If people have emotional baggages, how do they transform those baggages so they can lead people differently? We all have scars from our childhood. We all have been at certain level, at facing very difficult emotional issues or challenges. Now, if you don't heal those parts in you, well, they're going to impact the way you relate with people, the way you manage people, the way your worldview. And if you're interested in quantum physics, it is very much what quantum physics are talking about, that you create your world in relations to the way you think your world. So your reality is actually not the real reality, it's your reality from your perspective. So if you're leading a large corporation or a large NGO, what sort of culture do you want to set in your organization? And it's no point saying, well, I want an organization that has is based on trust and blah, 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 blah. But if you're unable to lead it yourself, And if your executive team is unable to also, walk the talk, then you're not going to be successful in embedding that in the organization. So some of the new leadership training that coming out of those top university is actually looking at this self-transformation model, which is a bit challenging, but I think it's significantly needed, and I'm going to demonstrate that in the next slide. So, before that, this is what we've done with Mission Australia. We looked at our values, we looked at what values the organisation need to be actually living, and we developed a leadership program that has numbers of phases. We've used, obviously, emotional intelligence as a 360 way to help to understand our people. We've developed a mentoring and coaching culture, and now we are looking at embedding our values into a bit further down, which means, how do we match values and behavior? And I said that yesterday, one of the challenges that organizations like us and others are facing is that, for example, your values is about delivering result with a certain set of values, and then some of your people are actually making their KPI, but outside of that value, set, what do you do? Do you keep them on board, particularly their financial KPIs, because as you know, everybody lives or dies with financial KPIs. So you have to come with a heart, you've got to actually face that difficult situation and decide, okay, is it better for the long run to actually work with that person to try to change their behavior so they match the value of the organization? And if it's impossible, are you prepared to let them go? Taking the risk that if they've really deliver on the financial part, taking the risk that the next person won't be as good on that level, but will work within the value set of the organization. So there are difficult issues, but I think if we want to, again, to walk the talk with integrity, I think that they're the question that any organization need to ask themselves. We've also worked with an organization, with PwC, and develop a program called Elevate, and this is another example of leading to spiritual capital, which is looking at our home, some of our street kids who are obviously facing a range of issues, and matching them with future leaders of PwC. And this Elevate program has been quite extraordinary, because it's not only about the future leaders of PwC giving their time and effort to help our clients. It's also about the skill sets that our clients can bring to PwC future leaders. Because what we know is that a lot of those firms that employ people straight out of university or background, those young, very bright, IQ-driven people don't have a huge amount of experience of life. So when you move them when you move them into management role and managing people or large complex operation, they haven't got the skill set to do that properly. So PwC was looking at, can we not only, use our CSR platform, but build a partnership with Mission Australia where we're helping their clients, but we're also helping ourselves, and providing some very good feedback to our senior leadership in terms of, succession planning. Who are the top young leaders that will actually make it to the top? And that's only one program, and they've got a suite of programs. We've also used volunteering as a way to help, again, all our partners to come into our organization at the core phase and get an understanding of community issues and also value add from their perspective, so they feel really good about themselves. And what we've seen through that is often it's also helped us to break the myth of what people think about, homelessness, for example. And we've got a range of stories that I can tell you about that. I mean, basically, if you understand that the average homeless man or woman in the inner city in Sydney or around Australia is under 30, you can understand that they're not exactly the stereotype person that most of us who are not necessarily informed about homelessness think. And if you go further, you understand that a lot of those people have actually had jobs, some of them in New York on the stock exchange, making a huge amount of dollars, getting into cocaine addiction, losing money, breaking down of family support, etc., all the way to the street of Sydney. then it's easier for people to start to relate and to say, oh, look, in my family, I know 5 people who were acutely depressed. It could be me tomorrow. So if I start to build some relationships, human relationship with some of our clients and missionaries, I'm actually learning, resilience skills and a range of things that may help me in my life, and I'm also feeling very good about myself. So let's look at the bigger picture, because this is where spiritual capital, I think, is probably the most interesting. The development are going to be the most interesting. What are the 5 big challenges? And Michael Hastings talked a lot about that in the last 2 days. We're looking at, from my perspective, 5 potential bombs that could tick any time. Scarcity of resources, water and oil, climate change, elevation of poverty, which some of us, we could link it to terrorism, and epidemic health. Do you know that if the bird flu is transmitted from human to human, it's going to have an absolutely amazing impact on workforce around, particularly developing countries, and large organizations are already planning to replace half of their workforce if this scenario is actually occurring. So what it means that corporation and the non-for-profit, the large global players, I said, look, we've got to take that seriously. It's not any longer an issue of it's an earthquake in Asia or floods in Bangladesh. It's actually potentially huge. Any of those areas have a huge impact into my businesses. And if I looked at risk management for the next 10 years, I've got to really look at, I'm going to be a player and work with other organizations or with government NGOs to actually try to reduce those risks. And so, again, organization or a set of conferences around the years that I said, what are the skill sets that are required for this leadership? Because it's really about political leadership, corporate leadership, and the non-for-profit leadership. And what people are saying is that maybe we need to look at leaders that have the capacity to understand those issues and to do something about it, and go beyond what I call our humanness, fragility. And if you look at those 4 people on that slide, you probably, if I ask you, what are the top 5 leaders or 10 leaders in the 20th century, I'm sure that at least 2 or 3 of those people will have come up in your mind. Now, what those 4 leaders had a very high SQ sort of embedded value. And that's what made them, transcending their humanness to more sort of putting the cause always first. And all of them had a pretty difficult time, but they never wavered, they never compromised their vision. So we are seeing around the world, grassroots example of leadership based on SQ and spiritual intelligence. So I think the future, from my perspective, is about the conversion of the sector. It is about the effectiveness of cross-sector partnership on the global level, and there's a couple of examples here which are on the periphery of spiritual capital. British BP, Beyond Petroleum, shifting from where they were to renewable energy, and of course Coca-Cola using the networks in part of the world to help with emerging needs. And another very good example is FASA. FASA that is really globally getting around the support, the issue of AIDS, and how we can really spend resources, networks, and develop infrastructure and use our human knowledge management to support the fight against AIDS. So, I'm optimistic that the future is really about cross partnerships, and it's about every sector taking its place and taking its responsibility, and understanding that we are all interdependent in this world, and we can't continue to act as if there is all those issues or not. Excuse me. That all those issues didn't really have a future impact on our businesses. And I'll leave you with a quote from Mandela just to finish on this spiritual capital concept. Thank you. Do you have any questions? Sorry, I've been a bit fast because I was aware that I had a lot of slide, and I hope I haven't overwhelmed you with information, but I'd love to take some questions now, if you have any.
Hi, I'm just interested in the insert that you did in the Sydney Morning Herald in Age, and what the reaction to that, because it was, it was a fairly amazing piece. I think, coming from a not-for-profit, even more amazing. But what's been the reaction, I guess, from other not-for-profits, from some of your corporate partners, from some of your private donors, I guess from a branding perspective, but also whether or not you've seen any processing donations because of it, or approaches from corporates wanting to partner with you?
Okay, so certainly in terms of donation, we did get some donation support. From our corporate partners, I think it was certainly very well received. Some of our partners didn't choose to come on board this time, and I think they were a bit disappointed that they made their own choice. Certainly those that are portrayed in the publications are very keen to do it again. From the non-for-profit sector, I think people are saying, well, why don't we do it ourselves? Got a couple of feedback where people thought that it was about the charity sector, and when they turned the page and said it was only about Mission Australia, they were a little bit surprised. From our brand, it's just been a win-win on all level because it's really telling the story about our clients. From Fairfax perspective and the Age, it's also worked very well. They've been inundated with letters to the editors saying, this is so good to see good stories in the paper, because people need hope. People want to read positive stories, So and from our, one story to tell you is we had a phone call from a gentleman in Bondi which was about to commit suicide. And as he was seriously considering that, he turned around and saw this bin, and on the top of the bin there was this publication. And he took it and started to read it. And he realized that he was not alone, and there's a huge amount of people around us that we have the same problem. And he called us. And just for that example, we felt it was so valuable that we got involved with that. So it's very difficult to measure the whole impact, but for us it's definitely been a win-win on all grounds. We haven't had one negative feedback from this publication.
You said at the start about the blurred demarcation between companies and NGOs, really fascinating. What are the other sources of income other than sponsorship that NGOs are looking at? And do you think that eventually there could be, like I'm talking many years after that, there could be almost a complete blur between them?
It's not many years apart, it's happening today. Okay, social enterprise, obviously competing with government tenders. So what we're seeing, for example, training and employment, we're seeing Manpower and Drake International are competing with Salvation Army and Mission Australia. So, 10 years ago, Drake and Manpower were really clearly, they were operating environment clear around training and recruitment, etc., etc. Well, now, and for us it's also a way to increase our income. Other form of revenue, some non-for-profit are buying businesses and running them efficiently and using the profit and recycling them into the community. But we're also seeing that corporations are setting up large foundations that have the scale. Bill Gates Foundation, $1.3 billion. It's got the scales of 5 times the Salvation Army in Australia. So, it's, as you say, it's very difficult. It's increasingly difficult to look at straight demarcation line. And I can tell you another example is that the corporate sector, in some part, and Michael Porter from Harvard Business School has written a lot about that, have decided in some ways to go on their own. And Pfizer, for example, invested $800 million in Brooklyn to renovate a plant, to buy the security in the subway, to buy a hospital, to buy a school, to develop housing, simply because they were operating out of an equivalent of Redfern. Productivity of the plant was very inefficient. Nobody wanted to live there. But no businesses wanted to be around them. And after 5 years, they got their money back. Why? Because of real estate values and business efficiency. But they went on their own. They didn't actually partner with NGOs. Vodafone in Africa is running microcredit program using their mobile technology to be credit cards. They're doing it on their own. They're not doing it with Opportunity International or the non-for-profit sector. So who knows what's going to happen in 10 years' time. But I think the bigger issue is, those 5 critical issues for the world. It's going to come to a time where corporates are going to say, look, we've got to take control, because if we don't, we might lose 50% or 20% or 10% of our assets globally. Now, can we run it in partnership with government and the non-for-profit, which is a preferred option? But if they can't manage it, they might decide to get together with 5 or 6 other conglomerates or corporates and run campaign at the scale that we've never seen. So.
Thank you very much, Eric. And, if I could just close by asking you to thank you, Eric. I think it's been a short and somewhat quick journey. We so often think of the relationship between the not-for-profit sector and the for-profit sector, and indeed government as the third sector, as being relationships of cash flow, of being pressure and power groups. I think what Eric's done is remind us that the people who find themselves in the corporate sector and the people who find themselves in the not-for-profit sector are, number one, the same people, you and me, and number two, we are a multi-dimensional species, and that spiritual quotient, if you like, is a far stronger linking factor than might be the most elaborate proposal or the most ornate evaluation. And my firm has done some evaluation work with Mission Australia, and I have to say the strength of their programs is very much the strength of their mission. So we thank you very much.
Thanks, David. Thank you very much.